Hi, I'm Pastor Joe Ferry from Southwest Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this is the first of 5 videos on abuse and abusive relationships. Before we get started, let me make sure that you're in a safe place as you're watching this video, and if you ever feel like you are in immediate danger, please call 911, get some help to ensure your own physical safety. Let's get started. This video is about what does abuse look like? And I want to start just by saying that it's important for Christians to talk about abuse for a couple reasons. One is just the prevalence of abuse and abusive relationships in our society. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control reports that 1 in 3 women in America have lived in an abusive relationship or are living in an abusive relationship. That's 1/3 of all women, and 1/4 of all men either have lived or are living in an abusive relationship. And when I say that, I mean they are the victims of that abusive relationship and not the perpetrators. So it's a prevalent thing in America. We need to talk about it. And the second reason, and probably more important reason for us as Christians, is that abuse is not right. It's not how God has made us to live. And God does not intend for any person to live in an environment of abuse, fear, guilt, and shame. We know that Jesus died on the cross and he rose again to give us forgiveness, to give us light and life and freedom. And the freedom that Jesus gives us is freedom from guilt, freedom from shame, freedom to live as God has made us to live in a right relationship with him and others. So this is really a gospel thing. If we want to do good in the world and display the effects of the gospel in our lives, we must know what abuse is, and we should not ever tolerate it in our communities. It's a matter of what we confess to be good and true as Christians. So let's talk about it. What does abuse look like? First, I want to point out a few things. Abuse is always about power and control in a relationship. What's happening in an abusive relationship is that one partner has decided that they have the right to control the other. And this goes beyond, it's a whole different thing than like relationship problems. There's a misconception out there sometimes that having problems in a relationship, problems of communication, for example, can lead to abuse. But that's not true. You can have 2 people who are doing their best to respect one another and still have a hard time communicating. When you have abuse in a relationship, what has happened is that one partner has decided they have the right to control their partner. It's a moral issue where one person says, I have the right to control my partner, and if they won't go along with what I decide is right, then I have the right to coerce them, right? To use threats or intimidation or violence or other emotional manipulation to control my partner in this relationship. I want to say too that as we get started, men and women both can be abused in relationships. I mentioned already 1/4 of men in America and 1/3 of women. So don't have the sense that only women can be abused in relationships. It happens to both men and women. And then also, I want to say that this is not just for marriage relationships, but abusive relationships can happen also as you're engaged and as you're dating as well. And that's why, for example, abusive relationships, they're called by a number of names. So you might also hear abusive relationships called domestic violence. You might hear it called intimate partner violence. These are an attempt to kind of broaden the scope and to recognize it's not just within marriage that abuse can happen, but in all sorts of intimate relationships. Whenever you're in a close relationship with someone else, not necessarily like sexually intimate, but any sort of close relationship, there is the potential for abuse. So you'll hear all of these sorts of things, these sorts of terms for abusive relationships. Like I said, abuse is about maintaining power and control over one of the partners in a relationship. And it can happen in many ways. The power and control can be maintained through financial control. For example, when one partner in the relationship keeps control of the money, so that the other partner simply doesn't have any financial resources to live a life independently of the wants and desires of the one who's controlling all the finances. That's a kind of financial control. It could be verbal or physical intimidation. Just by using, it could be one spouse using their size to intimidate the other. It could be actual violence or threats of violence. It could be just verbal intimidation and making someone feel afraid. That is an exercise of control. Like I said, verbal abuse, insults, put downs, and disrespect, making you feel like you're not worthy to challenge the other partner's, decisions. That's a kind of control. It could look like isolation, right? So if one partner controls who the other partner can see, when they can go out, whom they can spend their time with, and especially if one of the partners is trying to, separate their other partner from other friends or family members, other sources of support or strength and safety, that's a big warning sign, right? Because they're isolating a person in order to exercise control over that person. There can be cultural abuse, right? So when you come into someone else's culture and it's not good, and you're controlled, you don't have a say, and the person says, well, this is simply how we do things in my culture, and there's no other option for you except to obey me because this is how we do things, that is a kind of cultural, using the authority of culture to exercise power and control over a partner. There can be spiritual abuse, right? If you don't obey me, if you don't do what I say, then you are sinning because you're not submitting to me like you're supposed to. If you're not serving me like Scripture says you're supposed to, that can be spiritual abuse. And it's something that especially we as Christians need to be very careful about, that we don't use God's word as a way to threaten other people and to coerce them into doing the things we want them to do. And there's also crazy making, or you hear this called gaslighting sometimes, making someone doubt their own sense of reality by minimizing what you've done. When one partner in a relationship may hurt the other and say, oh, no, I didn't do that. That is crazy making. So minimizing, denying that you did something, or blaming the abused partner for the actions of the abuser. That's all what we might call crazy making. So those are some of the different kinds of abuse and control that you might see. And, if you're wondering, am I living in an abusive relationship? Because this might be surprising, but many people who live in abusive relationships don't realize that they live in one. Here are some warning signs. None of these are like a slam dunk, but if you find yourself saying, yes, I feel like I've seen this or felt this in my own life, then it's time to start thinking more about it, and if you're ready, to seek some help on it. So, does your partner blame you for their actions? Right? Does your partner say things like, well, if you wouldn't do this or be this way, then I wouldn't do that? And they're saying that you are responsible for their unpleasant actions toward you. That is a warning sign. Do you feel disrespected in your relationship? As if your partner doesn't think you're worthy or able to make decisions or to speak for yourself. That's a warning sign. Is there actual violence in your relationship or threats of violence? Or does your partner imply that they would or could get violent if you did not go along with their way of doing things? That's a big warning sign. And I should point out that violence, we should understand that pretty broadly. One of the things that can happen, back to minimizing and denying, is small acts. And it's only a push or it's only a poke. Well, only a push or only a poke, the abuser might say, but that can very much make someone feel threatened and physically or emotionally coerce them into going along with the abusive partner, right? So is there actual violence or threats of violence? Another warning sign. Does it feel like your partner has a public face that they show everyone else and then a private face that only you see, right? And very often this private face is the scary one, and the public face is very good at making it seem like everything is okay, right? If your partner has a public face and a private face, that can be a warning sign too, because this happens. People who abuse others in relationships, well, they understand what they're doing, and they understand they would incur social disapproval if everyone knew that they were threatening or controlling their partner, and so they don't let others on. They have the public face for everyone to see and the private face that only the abused partner sees. And, this can feel a little more subjective too. Only you are the expert in your own relationship. So, does it feel to you like your relationship is just one-sided? Like you don't get a say? That's a warning sign. And, although as Lutherans we don't often say this, but trust your feelings, right? You are the expert on your own experience. And if something feels wrong to you about your relationship with another person, and again, it could be a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a fiance, or a spouse, or even other relationships where there's the potential for power and control. If something feels wrong to you about that relationship, trust that feeling. And at the very least, find someone with whom you can trust to talk it over with. This could be a counselor, or I'll say it could be you could talk to me. If I know you, I'd be happy to talk to you confidentially. Now, these are some of the warning signs. And this is a little bit about what abuse is. Abusive relationships are always about power and control. And before we wrap this up, let me say one more time that Jesus died on the cross and rose again to forgive us and make us new. And because Jesus has done this for each of us, I can promise you that you are valuable. You are worth something because Jesus calls you valuable. Jesus gives you worth. Jesus does not call you to expose yourself to abusive relationships for any reason. And there is no reason why we should ask any person to stay in an abusive relationship. Not for the sake of the public image of the abuser or their family or the relationship. Not for the family's public image. And you know what? If you feel like you would feel ashamed for letting others know that you have been experiencing abuse in an abusive relationship, let me assure you that Jesus makes us new. And what has defined us in the past, or what has been our experience in the past, does not need to define us in the future and does not need to be our experience in the future. It is always better to get help, to get safety, to get free of an abusive relationship rather than to remain in it. That is always a hope because it's for freedom that Jesus has set us free. And this is freedom not just from sin and sinfulness, but from also all just the nasty things that the world throws at us. So if you are the victim in an abusive relationship, I want you to know that abuse is never your fault and there is help available. So if you feel like that might be you, check out our next video. Our next video is, if you feel like you might be in an abusive relationship, then what next? See you there.